Hey guys, this is Adwikta, and I am one of the devs of one of the developers of Hearth Arena, and I write articles, Infinite Player for God, has it been? It's been like a year and a half now, and I run the Arena Coop Loop Merps. It was requested on our subreddit for Hearth Arena that me and Merps kind of tell people our valuations of these cards as they come out, as opposed to all at the end, which we kind of did for BRM, but that was a smaller update. For this, I'm not going to make a video that tells you 150 cards. This is the Grand Tournament, by the way. It's coming. It was announced last week. It's coming out, and it's going to change the meta all at once because it's not going to be a tiered release. It's 100-something cards, I think 30, 150, and it's all going to come out on one day, and the Arena meta starting on that day will be completely different from the Arena meta before that. So rather than tell you, make this huge, like, 18-hour long video about all the cards at the end, I'm going to break it up. And this will be a long video, the first one, which will kind of outline my views on where Blizzard is going with this game in the arena and how all the mechanics kind of work with each other. And then the last video will also be long because there will just be like half the cards released, like 2 days before TGT gets released to the public. So in the middle, we're going to have weekly videos where I kind of go down the cards one by one. But this is going to be a slightly longer video than normal. And we'll try to keep it short, but last time I said that it went an hour, so we'll see. Okay, so first, what is the hero power? The mechanics that are at play in TGT, the biggest mechanic is the hero power, and it's the oldest mechanic, but it's good to review what the hero power actually does when you're playing a game of the arena, right? So the mage hero power is where everything's balanced around. Blizzard has said that before, and it's very clear from whenever they start using things and start releasing new cards that they really consider the mage's hero power. It pings for 1 damage. That's what it does. That is a Moonfire. A Moonfire is 0 mana. The hero power is 2 mana. So you're making the trade-off of spending 2 mana to not have to draw/use a card. That's all the hero power does, and you can only do it once a turn. Now, it works the same way. Paladin's a Wisp, 1/1 for 2 mana, and some of the other ones, I guess Hunter works as well. You have a Sinister Strike, which would be 3 damage for 1 mana, and so this is a little less than that. And all the other ones kind of line up along the same way. The priest gets kind of an extra bonus for the healing part of things. Not because healing sucks, but more because there's a recognition that the priest is the only class where the hero power will absolutely do nothing in the very beginning of the game. So if you miss a 2-drop, you actually do nothing, instead of doing something very like minor, like armoring up or like dealing 2 damage to bring your opponent from 30 to 28. But the hero power slows the game down. Whenever you use the hero power, you either had been put into a situation where your hero power perfectly counters that Magma Rager and you'll get your tempo back, but for the most part, like on a strict macro level, the hero power trades your tempo for a small amount of card advantage. When all of these mechanics come in that's going to use your hero power, the first thing that's going to happen is, if you're going to use these cards at all, because these cards generally aren't worth their value if you never use your hero power. And the mechanic I'm talking about, by the way, if you guys are like just entering this with no idea what's going on, Silverhand Regent, for example, Inspire is the new keyword, and it basically means this triggers whenever you use the hero power. So summon a 1/1 Silverhand Recruit. You can tell it's 3 mana for a 3/3. It's not that good. We get 3/4s, we get 4/3s for 3 mana these days. But a 3/3 with a 1/1 is better than any 3-drop that we have right now. Razorfang Hunter is a 2/3 with a 1/1, and that's their standard for when value gets split at the 3 mana cost one. So if you are going to use your hero power anyway, it's a better card than otherwise. If you're not going to use your hero power, it's a worse card. That's kind of how all of these are balanced. Lowly Squire, Inspire, gain +1 attack. You know, 2/2 for 1 mana, great. We don't have any 2/2s for 1 mana. We have a Zombie Chow with a drawback. We have things like that. We have a Flame Imp with a drawback. But we don't really have this card yet. But if you don't use the hero power, it's a 1/2. It kind of sucks. And the key is, you can use these later. So the 1/1 Silverhand Recruit, you kind of want it immediately so it can attack the next turn. But for like a 1/2, unless your opponent has something on the board that'll kill it, it's totally fine to wait a turn and hero power the next turn. So that's the Inspire mechanic. And the key point that I want to make that in understanding this mechanic is that it slows the game down if you are to use it, which is a double-edged sword. It means if these cards are very good, everyone will be slowing the game down, and the game will drag on because now you have just added all of this card advantage, this free card advantage into the game. And that always slows things down because you can only get this card advantage when you trade tempo for the card advantage. On the other hand, it means that in order to get any value from these cards, in order for these cards to be good, the game has to be slow already. If everything's moving at warp speed, you don't get the chance to say, oh yeah, I'll just trade like, 1.5, 2 manas worth of tempo this turn to like get some value out of this. You don't get to do that, you die. So we'll see where this goes. In the current meta, these cards would be viable, but they would not be good. I'll come out, like, flat out come out and say that. In the new meta, who knows, right? Maybe the game slows down a bit more. BRM has slowed the game down a bit. It hasn't made aggro less effective so much as it creates a lot more value when aggro starts trading as opposed to when aggro goes face. Draken and Crusher aside. And maybe this is going to go in the same direction. I think just in Constructed, Blizzard kind of recognizes there's a problem with aggro always being stronger than control, and so they're trying to make up for that. And you'll see cards doing this later. So moving on, the effects of the hero power mechanism. Okay, so we already talked about the slowness of the cards. The other thing that's going to affect everybody is that these are not targets you can leave alone, and this has been the theme with all the expansions, right? The mechanics in which there's 3 kinds of mechanics that go to work when you make a card. You have a neutral thing, or something with a battle cry, or something that kind of does what it does already and then leaves a body on the ground. Those cards you can do whatever with, right? You can leave them there. A 3/3 will always be a 3/3. If you have a bomb lobber, it lobbed its bomb, it's done. It is now a 3/3. Nothing else is happening to it. If you play a Chillwind Yeti, it's a 4/5. Nothing will ever happen to it. Someone may buff it or something, but generally it's going to stay at 4/5. You have the opposite working cards, which is the, oh, remove me, but at your cost kind of cards. Like the earliest one was probably a Harvest Golem from back in Classic, where you kind of don't want to kill it. That 2/1 is really annoying. It deals the same amount of damage as the Harvest Golem itself. Scarlet Crusader is a good example of it. And it's gotten super fancy now. You have a Haunted Creeper that creates 2/1/1s. Its attack actually grows once you remove it, so you really don't want to remove it. You have Void Caller, which ends the game if you remove it and your opponent happens to have the right card in its hand. But those cards are far and few in between. The much more common thing that happens whenever games start getting creative, when they have to, you can't keep releasing like neutral textless cards, and no one has fun with those. At least old players wouldn't have fun with those because we need more things to keep us stimulated. So when we create these text-based cards, you have cards that have an active ability that affects the game somehow, and generally into your favor. They're generally not downsides, they're generally positives. There's some psychological barrier where cards with downsides, like people feel especially bad about them because they're playing it and it's screwing them, even if overall it's actually better than the like worst statted card with the upside. But what it means is, as a game developer, you're really pushed to make these fun cards, these cards that are interesting, these cards that always affect the game as long as they're on the board. The problem with that is that all these cards basically have a tag on them that says, must be removed, or you should really prioritize removing this. If you don't, things happen, right? If you have a Flesh-Eating Ghoul on the board and your opponent doesn't remove it, it's going to grow really big. You have something with spell power on the board, your opponent doesn't remove it. Even if you don't have a spell now, or you don't have an appropriate spell now, whenever you draw one, or whenever your current one becomes effective with just that one more damage, you're going to get value out of it. These are cards that are going to get more and more into the meta. These are cards that are just going to be released more, so you're going to be offered them more, you're going to take more, people are going to have more of them, so you're going to be more and more incentivized to trade. And that's why I'm not worried about the people complain about the meta favoring aggro, or the meta favoring like dropping a lot of little minions, or just some formulation of that. That's because GVG swung things in a very heavy direction. But the natural course of things in the arena, unlike in Constructed, is going to shift more and more towards board trading whenever you leave it alone and don't do anything with it. So this Inspire mechanic is a great example of that, right? You can use a hero power once per turn. So you can use it on the turn it comes out if you want to, or you can use it on the next turn, and you can use it on the turn after that, and the turn after that, and the turn after that, and you get more value, as long as you can afford the tempo dip. So that's how these cards are going to work, and this is going to, so like how they play out is going to heavily depend on the meta. Right now, I think they're a little too slow to be actually good cards, but they are going to change the meta just by their existence into having more reason to trade on the board for everybody, as opposed to going face, which is a good thing. I think everyone thinks that it's a little too profitable right now in the arena to go face. And people, I don't know, people like drawn out games, or like slightly drawn out games. I don't know. I'm fine with going face myself, but okay. And then the big one, the big elephant in the room, and I'm gonna bring it up now, and I'll bring it up more as this video goes on, which is that hero powers are not created equally. Blizzard didn't make them equal. They don't work equally. And they're not really balanced for the arena meta to begin with. They're kind of balanced for constructed. And the biggest example of that, probably two biggest examples, one is Priest. And the Priest hero power works in a swingy fashion in the arena. As in, the variance in constructed with the Priest hero power and how good it is compared to other hero powers is like kind of pretty small. But the variance of it in arena is huge, because once you get on the board, your hero power effectively acts as a double mage hero power. That's an insane advantage. And if you don't get on the board, it's useless, like it always is. So this swings very, very hugely, and it makes Priest one of those boom-bust classes, not even necessarily based on the deck you get, but based on matchups and based on what cards your opponent have and what your draws are. And that, it takes a lot of the skill out of the class, I think. You think Priest, in theory, right, it should be one of the highest skilled classes, because you could do a lot of tricky stuff. There's a lot of like very high skill involved cards that exist in the Priest. You have to constantly balance like how much you pull back and how much you actually throw things on the board that you know are going to die. You have no way to like clean up your opponents, right? You have no way to deal direct damage to your opponent's minions for the most part. Holy Smite aside. And instead, your removal depends on like what type of minion your opponent plays. Like, is it something with 5 attack? Is it something with 3 attack? With 2 attack? Maybe I can steal it. And so it involves a lot of prediction and all that stuff. But in the arena, that's all wiped out by the sheer fact that the biggest factor in playing Priest is getting on the board. And so you get on the board in any way possible, and your opponent keeps you off the board in every way possible. And whoever wins that battle kind of wins the game, because your hero power is out of control if you're on the board, and your hero power is useless when you're not on the board, and your cards are not that great when you're not on the board either. So that's a problem in the arena. But the even bigger problem, as we all know, is the Warrior. Because the Warrior hero power sucks. Like, it really sucks. The Priest basically has the Warrior hero power without the good part. Like, the bad part of the Priest hero power is the Warrior's entire hero power. And you add the fact that Warriors have been getting crap cards for the last 2 expansions. It's in a bad state. And one of the reasons the Warriors sucked in the beginning, like it was never considered a great class, was because of its hero power. It's because it does nothing. Like, you want to use it in the late game, but you can't really get to the late game if you ever lose the board, because you can never hero power when your opponent has a board. They'll just end up dealing more damage to you than your hero power is worth, as opposed to you can get some tempo on the board and try to flip it. As the Warrior, you always need to flip the board, and then your hero power becomes okay, because then you can kind of get yourself out of lethal range. But it just sucks. There's no way of sugarcoating it. It's opposed to the Hunter's hero power, which kind of looks like it does the same thing, but with the Hunter's hero power, when you push, when you drop stuff, you're winning the game. Like, if you forever delay your opponent by dropping something and then using the Hunter's hero power, you will eventually just win the game. With the Warrior, you don't. You will continue losing the game. Like, slowly and slowly, you will just lose and lose the board more and more, and they will deal more and more damage to you, and your, like, mitigating factor of 2 health is not going to do anything. So the Hunter has a win condition with that hero power. The Warrior has, like, a very situational don't lose condition with that hero power, and it's otherwise like a baked-in cost to, like, weapons, and it's awful. But that's been around with us for a long time. What's really going to bring all this to the forefront is the fact that with Inspire, you need to use your hero power. And if you're a warrior player, you know you don't want to use that hero power. You don't want to touch that button until like 8, 9, 10 mana at the earliest. You really don't want to ever touch that that button until you're like kind of running out of cards and it's the late game and you already have your board and you know, you're a little low on health and you want to get out of that like fireball range or whatever. So these cards are not going to be good for warrior. They're going to make priest an even larger swing class than it already is, and they also have this weird effect on the rogue. Because you want to use the hero power every turn this card stays alive, right? Like, you get free bonuses with it compared to what you normally do. But the rogue can't keep using its hero power every turn. What are you going to do? Keep attacking people to the face? Like, it doesn't really quite work. And if you have a weapon, you can't use the hero power at all. So it puts the rogue in, like, a really weird situation. The rogue gets put into a lot of weird situations, though. So it's not like the first time that the rogue gets a little clunky. But it could be really powerful as well, because the rogue hero power is the best hero power in the early game. So again, it creates this weird dynamic. So rogue, but more so priest, and even more so warrior, all get heavily affected. And generally not in a good way. Compared to something like a mage, right? A paladin, where their hero powers are basically always good. Even a druid. A warlock, you kind of want to draw some cards anyway. You might as well do it at a time when it synergizes with the rest of your stuff. And it synergizes doubly, so something to note is that there's more synergies here. This is essentially a tribe. I know it's not like called a mech, and it's not, you know, called a dragon or whatever, but they all synergize with each other, because whenever you use one hero power, it triggers everything. So, to the extent your hero power is coming at a tempo cost of 2 mana, minus whatever its actual effect is, which is different for each class, each additional Inspire card you put on the board kind of reduces that cost, because it gets the tempo back. So if you have 2 of these cards on the board, you get 2 1/1s. Well, is 2 1/1s plus your hero power, let's say it generates another 1/1, is that worth 2 mana? 3 1/1s? Yes, that is definitely worth 2 mana. It's worth more than 2 mana. So in that sense, well, now my hero power is just pure card advantage with no tempo. And that's because you have the synergy and the combo out. It's not going to be the easiest thing to pull off, because I don't care how many Inspire cards they add into the game. It's not going to, like, flood our card base. The impact of this, just because the card offerings, is going to be... so GVG was 1/3, and like a little less than 1/3, and so this one is going to be like a 1/5, like maybe a little less than 1/5. Depends on how they deal out how they allocate between legendaries and epics and like class cards and all that. So the impact won't be as big, even if there's as many of Inspire cards as there are mechs. And there's not going to be as many Inspire cards as there are mechs. I don't think so. Because there were a lot of mechs in GVG. So it's not going to be that big of a problem, but when you do get these synergies to trigger, they're going to be like as powerful as Dragon synergies. And they're going to probably be more common than Dragon synergies, I would expect. Okay, so I basically listed a bunch of ways in which this is going to shift the arena in unequal ways. But one of the things I do like about the Inspire mechanic, besides the fact that it's fun, I think it's a brilliant way, and it makes classes farther apart in that it makes them more unique. Last time, with the BRM release and the GVG release, I talked about class convergence, which is that in the same way that if you just leave things alone and you normally develop a card game, everything you put on the board is going to have a tag that needs to be removed, and the game will be more board-centric. In the arena anyway. In constructed, it'll go the other way. But in the arena, it'll be more board-centric. In the same way, if you just leave things alone, all the classes are going to become more and more like each other. Because you'll always be filling in cards that the class can't do. Like, oh, you know, maybe Mage needs another this, and now you filled a gap. Well, that gap was kind of what defined the class. That gap was how I would play against Mage, and now you filled it. And you know, you've taken away one more way in which I treat the Mage differently than I treat another class. So this is a good way to kind of set it apart again. And it's a very strategic layer when you're thinking about it, because these are all the same cards, but you have to treat them differently for each class. And that's going to be fun. But the more mechanical reason that I like it is because you know what you're going to get. This isn't a Mech Warper, where it's also kind of a high synergy card, but you have to have a mech for it to work. Like if your opponent drops a mech warper and you have a choice between frostbolting it or dropping your own 2-drop, or even like coining out a 3-drop in order to eat the mech warper, what do? You kind of need to frostbolt it, because if he does have a mech and he puts out that piloted shredder or that mech yeti, you're done. Like this game is over. He has an 80% chance to win at that point. And if you're a good player, that's not a chance you want to take, for him to just end the game right there. So it's that powerful because he needed to have that other card, and it needed to be in his first like X number of cards, and it's not that easy to like pull off in terms of percentages. But for you, the person playing against him, you don't know. You have no way of knowing. It's card number 2. You don't have a read on him. So anything that you do will have to be like statistically correct, which means he gets an advantage for playing the mech warper, regardless of whether he has a mech or not to follow it up. That's bad, because that relies on RNG, and the RNG is what cards he draws. And the RNG is what kind of cards he was offered to build his deck. What's good is when you take the RNG out of this, and the same thing with the Void Caller on an even bigger scale, but what's good is when the RNG is taken off of a card that has kind of the same effect, in that if you leave it alone, it'll do stuff. And what's the RNG here? There's no RNG. You know what your opponent's hero power is. It's right there. You can like hover over it and check it if you forget. And you know exactly how much bonus they're going to get each turn out of it if they choose to use the hero power. And so you can plan around it. You can make it so that it's inefficient for your opponent to use the hero power the next turn. Like, okay, fine. You can grow your lowly squire by 1 attack, but you're going to be pinging my face. And that's not that great of a tempo play on your part, and that's not that great of a card advantage play, because you could have just as easily pinged my, 2-3 or whatever, and then traded the lowly squire in on your turn 2. Instead, now you're pinging my face and trading the lowly squire in. Is that really good? No, it's the same result. I have effectively played around your lowly squire's Inspire mechanic, so I did not have to remove it immediately. That's something good players are going to be able to do, and that's something every player is going to be able to do, once they learn it, when it comes to these Inspire cards. And that's a skill. That is not RNG. That's good. That is not draw luck. That is not, rock, paper, scissors. It's none of that. This is just, like, anticipation, looking a couple turns ahead of time, knowing what your opponent is able to do. I like this. So I really applaud Blizzard for this kind of mechanic, despite what I had talked about with before with how it's going to change the meta. I think the good parts are definitely outweigh the bad parts. Okay, so that's the effects of the hero power mechanics. Let's look at some specific cards now. I'm actually going to get into specific cards and how good they are. I'm going to make a very high-level comparison, which will help you understand the world of these inspired cards. Kodo Rider is going to be one of our bases, and we'll take the Silverhand Regent as the other one. Kodo Rider's down here. It's a 6-mana card. It's down here. It's a 6-mana card. Its Inspire is to make a 3/5 War Kodo, and the Inspire is on the Kodo Rider. So if the Rider dies, you can't inspire more Kodos to come fight for you. If the Kodo itself, the new Kodo, dies, nothing really happens. You can just generate another Kodo the next turn. And I'm going to compare it with the Silverhand Regent, where you generate a 1/1 Silverhand Recruit. Now, the reason these contrast so much, they're kind of generally valued about right for where they are if you use the hero power once or twice, right? It's kind of, yeah, you get that kind of value. But the way you play these are very different. If you play a Silverhand Regent and you don't use your hero power, you are getting a below average card, right? You're getting a 3/3 for 3 mana. But it's very slightly below average. It's 0.5 cost, and its upside, when you use the hero power once, is to gain 0.5 cost. It's to gain compared to your normal 3/4. It takes one of the stats of the defense, shifts it over to create another minion, and gives it another stat. So the swing is very low. It's a small scale Inspire. The Kodo Rider is a large scale Inspire. This is something that if you don't play with the hero power, you've just spent 6 mana for not even a 4-mana card, for an underwhelming 4-mana card, for what should be a 3.5-mana card. You have lost 2.5 mana by not doing this. And if they kill this on the turn it comes out with a fireball or whatever, you just did something like playing a Grim Patron. This is also why Grim Patron sucks, by the way. Just compare this card to Grim Patron. It's when you use the hero power as the mage. I mean, Grim Patron on a mage. Grim Patron on a mage creates a 3/2 and a 3/3, I think, that have the ability, and it takes 7 mana. And it uses up your hero power. Kodo Rider creates, for 1 more mana, creates 2 3/5s instead of a 3/2 and a 3/3. That's worlds apart. And you can actually use your ping to ping your opponent instead of the card. Like, that's like worlds apart. The value difference isn't even... We're talking like more than half the map of the tiers that we made apart. Like, not even close. And that's why we rate Grim Patron really, really poorly. Anyway, with the Kodo Rider, if you don't use your hero power on the turn it comes out, that's a stupid move. That's just a flat-out stupid move. Instead, what you have to do is play it as at least an 8 mana card. So then you get 2 3/5 Kodos. 2 3/5 Kodos come out for 8 mana. That's a little underwhelming. It should have come out for 7.5 mana. But you also get to use your hero power, which in and of itself is worth usually around 1 mana's worth of tempo. So you're coming out ahead already, right? You're like getting a good card already just by spending 8 mana on it. And if it lives for a turn, the next turn, you get like this insane value out of your hero power. So those are the 2 types of scalings, and the scalings are all different, right? Like, Lowly Squire has an even smaller scale, but they determine how you play these cards. Like, a Silverhand Regent is a 3-drop. A Kodo Rider will never be a 6-drop. Unless you have, like, absolutely nothing to do that turn or something. But it's turn 6. If you have nothing to do on turn 6, something's wrong with, like, how you drew or built your deck. Okay. So Lowly Squire is just actually looking at the cards now. Those are all just ways of how you should think about the Inspire mechanic and when you're playing the game and when you're building your decks. Lowly Squire 1/2 Inspire gain +1 attack, very good. You can put it on the late game and it'll do something on like other 1-drops. If you do it on turn 1 though, ironically, it still does nothing because you're not going to freaking hero power on the next turn. It does give you the option to kind of treat it like a really bad 2-drop. But it's not a turn 1 play. Instead, it's like a late game play for tempo. So, compared to other bad 1-drops, it's not bad, but they'll go around looking at it and thinking, oh yeah, it's like a 2/2 with upside. It's not a 2/2, it's a 1/2. If you play it on turn 1, you don't hero power on turn 2. If you do hero power on turn 2, it's probably going to be pretty useless to hero power on turn 2. The only time that this ability kicks in when you play it on turn 1 is if you don't have a turn 2 play anyway. So, it's kind of like, in a weird way, like a bad 2-drop, the way a normal 1/2 card would never be. And it's a bad 2-drop. It's like a 2/1. It's probably not even as good as a 2/1 when it comes to just being dropped on the board on turn 1. I mean, it's definitely not as good as a 2/1 when it comes to being dropped on the board on turn 1. But later on, it's better than a 2/1. So that's probably kind of where its value's at. Silverhand Regent, it's a very good card. It's not like an insanely good card, but it's going to be an above-average card. It's going to beat out that 50 to 60 range, I think. Because, well, you can drop it as... It's usually okay to drop it on turn 3, because you're not worried about the card necessarily being removed by a 2-drop if you're playing it on turn 3. Because either you've coined out 2 2-drops and you have the board, so you don't care, or you're the first person putting down a 3-drop. So you had put down a 2-drop, he'd put down a 2-drop, you make the trade, and then you drop the 3-drop. So in most cases, your 3/3 on turn 3 will be able to live a turn. And then you can hero power and play a 2-drop on the next turn, and then that's pretty okay. And in the late game, obviously, you just play with a hero power, and it's already better than your normal 3-drop. So it's a solid 3-drop, and it's an interesting one. It's a card I really like, especially that it's a common. Okay, I'll talk about Maiden. I'm going to skip Maiden of the Lake and all these other ones for now. I'm going to focus on the actual Inspire mechanic that affects tempo and has stats. So we already talked about the Kodo Rider and how it's played, and let's move on to the Fallen Hero. Where is the Fallen Hero? Oh, and I'm not going to talk about the legendaries at all, because you're just never going to see it in the arena. Okay, your hero power deals 1 extra damage. You can look at it as your hero power deals 1 extra damage, or you can just look at it as deal 1 damage, except you can't split it. That's really what it is. It's like Inspire, deal 1 extra deal 1 damage to like the minion that your hero power is targeting. Except I guess it's better if you need to like not ping him multiple times, and it's worse if you do need to ping multiple times, like in a Divine Shield. But it's 1 extra damage whenever you use your hero power, and it comes kind of for free. That's what makes it good, right? Like you can use it for free. Yeah, you already have a 3/2. That's a good value. If you use it on the same turn as your hero power, you get the value, or you can just put it out and then later on you can use it. So it's even better than Auto Barber. I think it's a little like worse as a drop, but then right afterwards for like a more control style, it's significantly better than Auto Barber. Auto Barber, you still have to take damage to your face. Sacred Warrior is just frankly like it's just an overpowered card. Whenever a character is healed, gain +2 attack. +2 attack is worth the hero power to begin with. A 3/5 for 4 is not bad to begin with. This is the priest version of like, you know how class cards always get a little bit of a boost, but it's that version of Silverhand Regent. And it's a 4 mana card. I'm always interested, and I'll talk about this, I'm always interested in what mana drops all of these different classes get, because it changes the way drafting works so much. And Priest has Lightspawn, and now it's going to get Sacred Warrior, and it already has a 3-drop in Dark Cultist, a really good one, and it has a really good 2-drop as well in Shrinkmeister. Like, they're just doing more and more things to allow Priest to curve out, which is fine, but this card is going to disproportionately... Like, you may look at it and think it's not the greatest card in the world, it's not the worst card in the world, and you're right, it's not the greatest or the worst, but its existence is going to make the Priest so much better. Poison Blade, I mean, it's obviously a crappy card. I think some people are trying to defend it. I have no idea how they're getting away with that. It's like a 6 mana for Stormforge Axe. There's like no value to this card in the arena. Just like none. Like, yeah, it's flexible, but it's way too slow. Like, maybe if it dealt that damage to that minion every single turn and actually like poison a minion, I can kind of understand. But as it is, this is awful. Thunder Bluff Valiant. It's a great card. It's a combo card, but it gives one more way for your totems to be triggered. And that was always a problem with Shaman, right? We always say, if you have a Flame Tongue, your deck is made. If you don't, it's a bit iffy. You need a ton of Fire Elementals to make up for it. And that's because your hero power is fairly useless unless you're able to trigger them. And because they're RNG, you can't like put them out on command. And then they're O2, so they don't actually do anything. They just really kind of taunt damage. They're all like taunt totems for your hero until your opponent gets enough that they can like clear. Like one board clear clears them all, and then it's just not good in this meta, where there's a lot of small things that deal like 1 or 2 damage. But Thunder Bluff Valiant kind of fills in the role where Flame Tongue Totem used to be drafted in every, like, you would get offered multiples of these in every single draft because there weren't that many cards. And now there are a lot more cards, and Flame Tongue Totem's offering rate has gone down so significantly that it's affected Shaman's viability in the arena as a whole, even though Shaman keeps getting these great cards. Thunder Bluff Valiant will definitely help with that, as well as all the other totem synergies, right? Like, they did it to address like a problem in Constructed, but it's going to really turn the class around in the arena. This is like the Shaman's redemption in every way possible. And in the arena, you can argue Shamans didn't really need redemption. It's kind of like a middling class. It's been falling off from the elite. It used to be elite. It used to be like, oh, Mage is the best, but then what's second? It could be Paladin, it could be Rogue, it could be Shaman. Like they're all in the discussion. And now Shaman is definitely not in that discussion anymore, and it hasn't been since GBG. Okay, so those are the new hero power cards, and oh, sorry. Now we'll get back to Maiden of the Lake.